Welcoming everyone who is signing on to the webinar right now. We're so happy that you're joining us to talk about how we are going to bust the business case of a North Coast pipeline in British Columbia. Looks like we have a lot of folks signing on. And we are here with our panelists, ready to have a very interesting conversation about an issue that we've all been hearing so much about. It's really ramped up in the last week or so, and I think the time to talk about so many aspects of this proposed project. This is really good timing for talking about all sorts of aspects of this project, including the economic case for and against. So I'm excited that so many folks are interested in joining us for that this evening. It's a couple minutes after 6, so I'm going to get started. I'm Shelley Luce. I am the campaigns director at Sierra Club BC, and we're busting the business case of a North Coast oil pipeline this evening in our webinar. And I really want to thank everyone for joining, and I would love for folks to type your name and the name of the nation whose traditional territory you are joining from. And I want to say welcome to everyone. I am really excited that you've all joined for this conversation tonight about the real costs and consequences of an oil pipeline in BC's North Coast. And I'll start by sharing that I am calling in from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And I'm really, really grateful to live here in this beautiful place. And I really want to take responsibility and support Indigenous rights and title and contribute as best I can to a healthy and caring community here. So thank you, everyone I see sharing in the chat. I appreciate that. Tonight's conversation is about a pipeline that doesn't exist. It's about a pipeline that's being discussed, but it's about a lot more than that too. It's about honoring the leadership of the many First Nations, and especially the coastal First Nations who have protected the waters of the North Coast of BC for millennia. It's also about choices that we have to make. Will we double down on fossil fuel mega projects like pipelines that endanger the environment and future generations? Or will we invest in a cleaner and more equitable and climate-safe future focused on renewable energy? So we're really glad that you all are here to explore what's at stake in the North Coast of BC and what we can do together to prevent this kind of risky project from ever happening here. I'll spend just a minute providing some context. After decades of advocacy from First Nations, coastal communities, environmental organizations, and people across BC, the federal government of Canada adopted a moratorium on oil tankers to British Columbia's North Coast in 2019, and that continued an informal kind of arrangement of avoiding those waters with oil tankers that had been in place since about the 1970s. And we're talking about something called the Hecate Strait, which is known around the world as an extremely dangerous to navigate place because of the bathymetry there, the shape of the ocean floor, causing incredible currents, huge waves caused by the currents combined with very extreme high and low tides and winds that blow through there, making it an extremely dangerous place to navigate. And we do not want oil tankers in places where ships are likely to run aground and cause an oil spill. So keeping oil tankers out of the North Coast region protects an abundance of wildlife, of biodiversity, whales, many species of salmon, many kinds of seabirds, kelp forests, eelgrass, not to mention cultural sites and cultural practices of many First Nations and thousands of local jobs. There's a thriving tourism industry there. There are thriving fisheries there. The ban on oil tankers also effectively prevents pipelines that would otherwise come to the coast in order to ship oil overseas. So today, the Premier of Alberta is pushing to overturn that ban on oil tankers in order to build a pipeline from Alberta's oil sands to the coast in order to export bitumen to Asian markets, assuming they're going to want that for any amount of time into the future. This would mean it would have to go through some of the most biodiverse and dangerous to navigate waters in the world there in Hecate Strait. And as many of you have heard, it looks like Alberta and Ottawa, with our Prime Minister Mark Carney, have been talking behind closed doors about an MOU to support this pipeline project. This is without coastal First Nations, whose involvement and consent is absolutely required, and without the BC government, who has said repeatedly that they do not support the project. So I'm going to introduce our panelists now and just some quick housekeeping. If you have questions, please add them to the Q&A. At the bottom of the page, you will see a button where you can add questions, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can during the Q&A portion of the webinar and after we have a discussion with our panelists. So I'm very, very honored to introduce you to Doug Neasloss, who is Stewardship Director and elected councillor with the Kitasoo Xaixais Nation. And Doug is also a global leader in Indigenous-led marine stewardship, ecotourism, and sustainable local coastal economies. So we're thrilled to have Doug here. Also, we have with us Andy Hira, a professor of political science at Simon Fraser University, whose work focuses on the political economy of energy and public infrastructure. Andy is going to help us unpack the financial realities behind mega projects like a pipeline of this nature. And we are also delighted to have with us Grace Nosek, a legal scholar, author, and one of Canada's leading experts on climate misinformation and industry influence. This is how they sell pipelines and other fossil fuel projects. Grace will help us understand the narratives and the legal forces that are currently shaping this debate about a pipeline in northern BC. So I will first turn to Doug, and I would love to start by asking you a question. Would you start by sharing us a bit about your territory and the Great Bear Sea more broadly, and what makes this place so special?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Doug Neasloss. My other name is Mukwesklaw, which means white bear. Yeah, I live in a small community called Clem2. It's home to the Kitasoo Xaixais people. We live right in the heart of the Great Bear Rainforest and the Great Bear Sea. Our area is probably one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. We're talking about old-growth trees, salmon, and bears, grizzly bears, to spirit bears, salmon. And so, yeah, we just live in a very unique place, and a place that many of the coastal nations have worked hard to protect, starting from big battles in the 90s to protect the Great Bear Rainforest, and now we're working to secure the Great Bear Sea. So, yeah.
Thank you. As we mentioned earlier, you and your community and others in coastal First Nations fought for a long time to achieve a federal moratorium on oil tankers in those waters and to defend it. So what's going through your head now as you hear about this discussion, this proposal by Alberta, and this talk of an MOU between the federal government and Alberta?
I have a lot of thoughts, around this. I mean, I haven't had an opportunity to consult my community on this yet because this is, pretty hot off the press, and I'm just making my way back home. But a bit, very frustrated. I mean, obviously, we've done a lot of work to try and protect the Great Bear Sea. We've been working for a better part of 20 years trying to get some marine protection, and I think this would set us back in a lot of ways. We've worked with all of our coastal communities, and it feels a bit frustrating the fact that the federal government forgot the first time around. All of our communities launched court cases, and we defeated this project. And we fought hard for this oil tanker moratorium, and so it's kind of hard to believe that we're back to the same position we were. And we spent probably a good 5 or 6 years battling this in the courts. And so we spent millions and millions of dollars trying to stop these sort of projects because we understand that one spill could wipe everything out, and so that's something we didn't want to see. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is shocking. I was shocked to hear this. We call it sometimes the zombie pipeline because we're aware of that fight, that very expensive and exhausting fight to prevent the first um, proposed Enbridge pipeline. An amazing report came out last week from coastal First Nations that showed that economic activity in the Great Bear Sea contributes $1.77 billion in economic output for the province based on these marine ecosystems that you mentioned. Seems like they're very important for food security locally, and also for commercial fisheries. So, do you have an idea of how allowing oil tankers here might threaten those values? What happens if there's a spill? What happen? How is that impacting those values?
Yeah, I think one spill could wipe it all out, and for a lot of our coastal communities, we've been fighting very hard to develop an economy here in the Great Bear Sea. We've been denied economic access in the past, especially around commercial fisheries and the high value commercial fisheries. And so we finally got our foot in the door and we're starting to support local fishers that are buying vessels. We're training them, we're buying them, helping them get off their feet and trying to, help them make a living in their backyard. And so this has been a huge change over the last really 2 or 3 years we started to see in our communities. We have things like ecotourism. I put a lot of time and effort helping my community develop. We have a community owned and operated ecotourism called Spirit Bear Lodge that the community relies upon. We go out to all these rivers and take clients from all around the world to come and enjoy the beauty of our territory and, view spirit bears, and grizzly bears, and black bears, and wolves. Um, and so, yeah, I think all this hard work that we've done, and this is what we said back when we were fighting Enbridge back in the day, that one spill could devastate all of that, and we depend on the ocean for food, we depend on the ocean for transportation, we depend on the ocean for our survival. And so,
Hmm.
yeah, one spill could wipe it all out. So,
Hmm. That would be terrible impacts. And we recently produced a map showing that, kind of the extent of a spill, if there was a spill equal to what spilled from the Exxon Valdez many years ago. But if that happened in Hecate Strait, the area that would be covered by that was it's shocking to see. And we're going to be able to share that later. So thank you for that, Doug. Is there anything you'd like to add right now before we ask a couple of questions from Andy? Or we can move on and come back for more questions from Doug.
well, yeah, that sounds good.
Thank you. Okay. Andy, I have some questions for you kind of about the economic realities of building a project of this type. So far, Alberta has committed 14 million in public funds, taxpayer dollars from that province for the planning phase, sort of a feasibility study, I understand, for the project. So from a taxpayer perspective, what kind of financial risks would accompany a project like this if taxpayers are going to invest in kind of laying the groundwork for setting up such a project?
Well, if the LNG Canada project is any example, and I think it is, are likely to be massive cost overruns.
Mhm.
And so the taxpayer is doing a feasibility study. 14 million is not that much. We're talking about hundreds of millions, if not in the billions, to build this pipeline. So the real question is, uh, if the economics are not behind this pipeline, why throw $14 million at it? The only explanation can be that Danielle Smith and the politicians in Alberta want to look like they're doing something. And they have to look like they're doing something because the IEA, the International Energy Administration agencies rather, and other energy analysts have pointed out that there's a huge glut of oil and gas coming onto global markets. And
Mm.
so by the time this infrastructure gets built, there's probably not going to be much of a market. And I would say the same is true for our LNG. And so this is sort of just like political kabuki theater. There really isn't a strong economic case behind either building a pipeline or building LNG.
And what happens if there's a spill, either along the pipeline route, which certainly happens at times, or in the coastal ocean? Where does the financial burden lie when that happens? Because the cleanup can be extremely expensive.
It's true, and if we look not only at Exxon Valdez, but also at the Gulf Coast off of Louisiana, where we had Deepwater Horizon,
Mhm.
where BP, who later called themselves Beyond Petroleum and then retracted from that, uh, created a huge man-made disaster in Louisiana. The fishing is still trying to come back, over a decade after that spill. So the cost will be ongoing. They'll be borne largely by the communities that are in the proximity of it. There's no way that the federal or provincial government will be able to clean this stuff up once it spills. And so the real liability is going to be for the immediate communities that are in the proximity of that spill.
I find that so deeply disturbing, especially given what Doug just said, that it took a long time for those communities to gain access to high value local fisheries as sustainable jobs for those communities. And then to think that they would be the ones to suffer by having those fisheries wiped out by a pipeline from Alberta is just deeply disturbing. Um, at the same time, on the economic side, I keep reading that Asia and other places are electrifying faster than anyone predicted and installing renewable energy, especially solar, because it has now become by far the cheapest source of energy. And Asia is the intended market for this oil, according to Alberta. So, how does this play into the discussion here, and how can that be justified by folks who support a pipeline?
Yeah, I think you've got your finger on something that is really important because our governments are looking at what has happened over the past 100 years, but those events are not a good signal for what's happening now in oil and gas markets and in energy markets more generally. What we have is, because of Chinese subsidies over a 20-year period, a hockey stick, a downward hockey stick effect of prices for renewable energy. Solar and onshore wind in particular are now competitive with natural gas. Now, the only reason why natural gas is continuing is because of sunk costs, that is, plants that have already been built, and because solar and wind are intermittent. And so governments are hedging their bets and saying, well, we need baseload energy, and so we're going to still rely on natural gas. But what you're seeing is the incredible uptick in sales of EVs as they become cheaper and have a longer range, and the decline in battery prices will slowly start to erode from natural gas. It's happening already in Europe and China. It's just North America that's really behind on everything.
Hmm. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. I have a few questions for Grace, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. And I noticed in the chat some folks are saying that they really want to make a difference on this issue. So I just want to let folks know that at the end of the discussion, we're going to provide some avenues for taking action. So don't worry, there are things we can do about this. Grace, can you talk a bit about the narratives that you see commonly used to build support for fossil fuel mega projects like this?
Sure, yes. I also just want to say thank you again for everyone joining and the other speakers. It's a Wednesday night, a rainy Wednesday night, and I always marvel that people give their time and their energy to this space. Like, thank you, genuinely. There's a lot of demands on our time, and already I think you're doing something by being here. So that's amazing. Yeah, I think some other folks have already kind of alluded to this, but this is storytelling. Like, this is theater. The MOU that we have coming out, like, this is a story, a signal to try and show that this pipeline could go through, that there's public support for it. And what I think we need to do on the other side is to signal that there will be huge consequences for any group trying to build that pipeline, that there will be resistance, that it is not wanted by many of us. Um, but what we see is, unfortunately, the fossil fuel industry has this huge narrative advantage. Essentially, for the last 30 or 40, 50 years, they've been seeding stories into our public imagination. And this is what my research is, how deep these stories go. They're not just buying ads, although they're doing that. If anyone watched the World Series, you might have seen a pro mining ad run by Ontario. Like right in this moment of excitement and pride that we saw how many Canadians were watching that baseball and that kind of placement, that story about what resource extraction and means to Canadians. It's so front and center. But for decades, the fossil fuel industry has been planting this story that fossil fuels are a good life, that they give you freedom, that they give you economic independence. And there's some really interesting work done by Shane Gunster, for example, at SFU, talking about petronationalism in Canada, that there's been a really powerful push to connect the Canadian identity to fossil fuels, that it's a point of pride, that it's a moral prerogative to use the fossil fuels within the country. And so there's this really strong narrative advantage that has been seeded for decades. And at the same time, there's this other narrative disadvantage that we in BC have, which is that Danielle Smith and other people are framing this as pan-Canadian benefit, nation building. This benefits all of us. And BC is being framed as this kind of, one province and small group of elites and First Nations standing in the way of something that benefits everyone else. Because it's those groups who will bear the burden so disproportionately, but they have to
Mhm.
tell a story that kind of can capture more people, or a story that can help the BC government hold the line. There's kind of
Mhm.
storytelling at a couple levels that can and need to happen. So, and of course, with kind of this geopolitical moment, with the unrest happening down south, people are scared. They're worried about their jobs. They're worried about housing. They're worried about economic stability. And so it's even easier to kind of go back to what we know and sell this story of what is a good life and what gives us independence. And just to give you an example of how deeply they're putting this into our imagination, they go into children's books, the fossil fuel industry and their allies. There's a book called kind of Petro Pete's Big Bad Nightmare. And in it, a little kid wakes up and all of everything in his life tied to fossil fuels, every object disappears from his life. So he goes to school and like his soccer ball is gone, his ice cream machine is gone. This is how they sell that fossil fuels are
Wow.
really a good life and give us independence. And these are kind of the stories right now, especially we're seeing this is not just happening in Canada, it's happening around the world, that kind of energy security, that this is how you protect your independence and your good life. Even though it's so wild to hear the other speakers speak that like it's not true. It's not the
Mhm.
reality. It's not going to give us economic independence. We have all these other things, indigenous led, that are actually creating much more value in every possible way, in every meaning of that word. Um, but, and this is such an important takeaway, is the social science says that what you believe is true shapes how you act and how you feel more than what is actually true. So this really
Mhm.
becomes a storytelling issue.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Um, what we believe is true shapes what we do more than what is actually true.
Yeah.
Can you help us think about what narratives would help people connect with the value of protecting our coastal resources, the realities that Doug and Andy have shared already this evening, because it is really hard to overcome that kind of marketing. I saw those ads during the World Series too, and those were from the Ontario government. They weren't even the mining companies. Um, and yeah, we're all subject to the petrochemical industry storytelling all our lives. So and it can be hard for some of us to imagine how to share the narrative in a way that can help to overcome that, especially if people are already believing the fossil fuel narrative. How do they hear this other story?
Yeah. Yeah, I share the power of the narrative not to make it seem impossible because actually we are seeing the narrative be challenged in ways that it never
Mhm.
has before. And I work a lot with young people. And I show them kind of how they are specifically being targeted by the fossil fuel industries. And what's so interesting is that the fossil fuel industry often has to hire young influencers to tell the story because no amount of money can ever actually replicate passion or like true love for the coast or what you're doing. And it's these influencers, kind of everyday people, who actually connect the most with their peers and with the public. And this thing that I come back to over and over again is that no one is better at talking to our community than we are. We are more powerful than any fancy ad that you can see on the TV, any influencer. Um, we don't talk about it that often because we think people maybe don't want to hear it or we don't know what to say. But the the reality is that being genuine and caring is the secret sauce that corporations can never create. And so they always try to buy it from other influencers. But we have it. We have it in spades. That's what drove you to show up here on this rainy Wednesday night. And I've been just doing it, just going classroom to classroom. The way kind of I channeled my love and what I would really encourage you guys to do is think about what you love about the coast. Tell that story. Talk about different stories of resilience. Like really have empathy for the fact that people are suffering and scared right now. I think that is just true. And I think there are different stories we can tell to meet them where they are and about what a resilient Canada and a resilient British Columbia looks like. Um, and we're starting to see kind of the seeds of those stories that like all these other industries actually give us so much more, that Indigenous-led protected areas give us so much more, really amplifying those stories. Because some other
Mhm.
interesting research that Shane Gunster did is that um, the fossil fuel industry has all this power. People kind of recycle their posts when they post, but we don't necessarily have the same thing in environmental spaces, kind of that re-amplification of a story over and over again. We're kind of missing that storytelling infrastructure. And so that is something everyone can contribute to. Like if you see something that resonates with you, it probably resonates with your community. Share it, pass it around. That is the kind of stuff that is really potent. And the other thing that I always try and tell folks is think about the stories you might be telling yourself too. Because again, what we believe to be true is more important than what is actually true. So what we see is that if people don't think there's a chance, if they don't think they can come together to defeat the pipeline, if they think it's impossible, they'll give up much more easily than if they believe in collective power. And if they believe that it may be a long battle, but like we did before, we can win again. And that's the thing, we won before, led by folks like you, Doug, and your nations. Incredible, deep work done over years. My goodness, it was incredible. But we did win. And this
Mhm.
should be easier to win now because the economic case is even weaker. So drawing back, thinking about that we've already won, we can win again. It seems like a zombie pipeline, but it's even weaker this time around. But we have to know the stories that we're telling ourselves, kind of to
Mhm.
question them that, this might be a fight because Danielle Smith obviously needs this for her political, she's using it, right, for her own political gain. So we might have to battle for a while. But we
Mhm.
very much can win.
Please, Andy.
Yeah, that's a really excellent approach, I think. I would add a couple of additional points. One is that the environmental movement tends to be fragmented. We have lots of different think tanks and social movements and foundations that are all involved in this. And I think we really owe it to ourselves to see if we can get ourselves together and start to work on the same page, as Grace said, to amplify our message. When you look at the fossil fuels industry, the most effective lobbying group in Canada by far is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. We don't have anything like that to act as a counterweight. And part of that counterweight has to be addressing the main issue that people have in this time of stress, which is the cost of living. And so the environmental movement hasn't been very good at addressing those, core concerns about jobs and employment. And in fact, what we have tried to do in my research group is point out that fossil fuels are going to create way more costs than the kinds of benefits and jobs that they provide. And there is this different future. There's an alternative future available to Canada, which is to invest in clean energy and become a global leader in that and create those jobs here on the basis of the natural resources that we have and the natural talent that we have. And so all the money that we're investing that will be lost in these fossil fuels as the global markets start to tank, that money could be invested instead in creating new jobs. To me, that would be a much better narrative than simply saying we're against something. Let's tell them what we're for as well.
Thank you. That's a great point. And can lead to some good storytelling too, and the vision of what we could be moving toward instead of continuing in the old model of fossil fuels. And I wanted to touch on a point that Grace made about telling ourselves stories and seeing collective leadership and collective action um, and how that has succeeded. And your point about this pipeline is a great point. And so it is really, I think it's really valuable when we tell those stories, including the stories of the First Nations who fought for so long and worked for so long to get the tanker ban put in place, because I think it's really inspiring and it really helps all of us. First of all, see a model of how that worked, and secondly, to continue to put our energy into it and know that it is worthwhile and that we can win this fight if it has to be a fight, or that we can bring enough people along to want something different if we focus on doing exactly that. And we do need to make those economic arguments, Andy. Thank you for bringing that up. We tend to say in the environmental movement, we're saying more and more talking about the jobs that are provided. And when I mentioned that study that Coastal First Nations produced about the 1.77 billion in economic output, that's really huge. And I think it's worth talking about because that 1.7 billion is coming from a whole bunch of different activities that don't have the kinds of damage that a spill would have, or that the carbon pollution from burning that oil when it eventually gets where it's going will have. And so that's a much more sustainable um, economic activity. So I want myself and others to get better on the environmental side at telling all of those stories. So I appreciate you both bringing them up. Um, I would love to give our three panelists the opportunity to ask each other anything that has come up during the discussion, because you all touched on such interesting things, and your work is all each of your work is related to the others, but also a little bit different. So, Doug and Andy and Grace, if you have anything that you wanted to raise right now, we can take a moment for that.
It
And
would be
also,
great from my perspective to go right to the audience questions.
yeah, absolutely. That's why folks have joined, because they have a lot of energy and a lot of interest, and I'm sure many questions around this issue. So I am going to look at our Q&A here. There's a couple of questions there. There are a lot more in the chat. So if you have a question you've put in the chat, please put it in the Q&A, because that's where I'm going to be able to see it and bring it to our panelists. One question here is, I heard there's an idea of expanding the existing Trans Mountain pipeline and dredging Vancouver's harbor in order to allow larger tankers, and this might be even considered a trade-off for instead of a Northwest pipeline. Do you, Andy, have any information about that or any thoughts on that um, from an economic perspective?
Well, the previous government decided to buy a pipeline by expanding the TMX. And that goes right to the heart of the economic discussion that we just had, which is the private sector doesn't see these projects as viable. And so,
Mhm.
why would the public sector subsidize projects that the private sector won't carry out themselves? To me, that's a strange thing that the government really should answer for, especially when we have so many other needs for that investment. But I would not be at all surprised. TMX right now is only at 75% capacity. And part of that is because of that tar sands oil is so heavy, it takes up a larger volume of the pipeline. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this ends up being a secondary offer, once this second pipeline ends up, burning because of BC opposition. We should be prepared for the idea that TMX could be expanded again.
Hmm. And there is a story around TMX, Grace, that's quite disheartening because, as you know, it was fought for many years, believed to have been won by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, partly through their work, through a lot of their work, and many others. Um, the original company interested in that pipeline, Kinder Morgan, backed out, and then the Canadian government purchased it and built it instead at like enormous cost. So that would be a great example of where the storytelling, we need to shift that storytelling, make sure we have a different story this time.
Yeah.
But fortunately, as Annie pointed out, the economics have changed a lot.
Yeah, maybe I'll just jump in there because
Please.
I think that's such an important point. I think you're seeing a lot of cynicism and apathy. Again, I work particularly with young people, but I don't think it's unique to them. But there is so much um, sense of why engage in politics? Why come into the fold? Everyone is always going to disappoint me. Everyone is the same. And so I find like this really broad cynicism. But then when I actually challenge the cynicism, when I model how much joy and meaning I have found in stepping into the fight, even when we lose, I find that cynicism evaporates. People want to feel like they can make a difference. It is like core to it's foundational to our being. And the thing is, we all can make a difference. That has been shown over and over and over again across the centuries. It may be slow. We may lose some battles, but my gosh, the people who care, who lean in, the way that they've shaped every part of our society. And so I think this is where modeling your own belief, talking to the people you know you can move, and making sure that the story isn't just that a shallow push wins. I think that's always really dangerous to me, which is when people think, well, I voted and I called my rep once and this didn't happen, like I'm out. I think we need a story that this is a hard fight, and part of that is that the villain in this story is very powerful. Like, not the villain, but the person who's been telling this story and pushing pipelines and fossil fuels has invested billions and billions and billions of dollars over decades. This is going to be a long, hard fight to unwind their power and influence over our public imagination and political reality. And remembering that, holding both that truth that this will be a hard and long fight, and that there's so much worth fighting for, and that there will be victories as well as losses. Um,
Mhm.
but I think honestly also just a moral prerogative for young people to show that we care, that we will lean in, that they may think everyone has betrayed them, but we won't. We will come into the fight.
Yes, we will. We are. Related to that, I have a question here that says, where is it? Do we have and identify a leader or leaders, or is this effort horizontally driven with a harder to identify leadership? I'm not sure if the questioner is asking about the push for the oil or the push to defend the tanker ban, but I would take the latter part there and say regarding leadership on a push to defend the tanker ban and prevent the oil pipeline. And I'll give one answer, which is that the coastal First Nations have led this for a long time, and Sierra Club BC looks to the coastal First Nations as to help direct our actions and our messaging and that kind of thing. At the same time, we want to do the work of working with the many people in BC who are interested in fighting this fight and protecting the North Coast, who are not themselves First Nations, and who have the ability to speak up. So the leadership, I think, is coming from First Nations, but needs to be very strongly supported, and the work and on the ground needs to be done by all of us who care about this issue. But I would love to hear from Doug or Andy or Grace on that question as well.
It's a challenge for the reason that I mentioned earlier, which is not all First Nations are speaking with the same voice. We see that with LNG, where the Niska, among others, have agreed to the second pipeline. Um, and I think it's also unclear about, you know, what influence the environmental movement is able to wield in comparison with the strength of the fossil fuel lobby. And it's not just a matter of the number of times that Canadian Association for Petroleum Producers is meeting with ministers. It's the amount of revenues that are going directly into the Alberta budget from fossil fuels, the number of jobs that are concentrated in Alberta, as well as, to a lesser extent, to the federal government. So I think it's really important for us to find an exit strategy for Alberta in economic terms to tell the workers that are in the oil patch that have come from all over Canada just to make a living that we have another plan for you. We have a transition plan for you. Instead of waiting for 10 years for the oil economy to collapse, we're going to transition you to clean energy jobs. I think that would, again, provide a carrot instead of just a stick.
Thank you. Yes.
Maybe I'll chime in as well. Maybe I can answer also another comment I heard just around counterweights. I think we do have a leader, and I think it is Coastal First Nations. We've taken the lead the first round. Our nations are all connected, and I think that's something is pretty unique. And being part of that first one was pretty exciting. Because it united all of our communities. It lit a fire under everyone. We had tons of allies. It was one of the strongest movements I've ever been a part of. And, I think a lot of people forget that a lot of our communities are connected. We're friends, we're family. Our position on oil hasn't changed. And so I think coastal First Nations will certainly be at the forefront of this. Something we have is rights and title, and that's something that we're never going to surrender. We've never given it up, and I think that's going to be a major difference maker, just like it was in the first round. So at the end of the day, we're not going anywhere. We enjoy a good fight every now and then, and it's unfortunate we have to, you know, be a part of these kind of things. I mean, the risk is not worth it. That's what we said, back in the day, and this is still true now. So I would imagine, coastal First Nations are talking about this now, and I would imagine this will start, resonating in our communities in the next very short while here. So.
Doug, that is the story that I want to tell myself, that people who are friends and family and neighbors are connected and remain strong in their vision of an economy and just taking care of the lands and waters without allowing a pipeline like this. And that's where many of us can rally and support that fight. I have a few more questions here from the audience. One person asks if we know what a timeline for a project like this would be. Should there be a project? Should they continue to discuss it? And based on that, what would be the timely strategies for coalition building among First Nations, environmental groups, and other communities? So if not a timeline necessarily, like can we come together, and can we build our coalition in a timely way to counter this proposal? I say yes. The story I tell myself is yes, we can and we will. And we already are. As Doug said, the coastal First Nations are already there. And many environmental groups, including Sierra Club BC, are looking to follow their leadership and support. And Grace, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just gonna wait to see if
Yeah.
yeah, anyone had thoughts because to me this is yeah, coastal First Nations lead, we follow, we amplify, and then I mean in the interim, people I know in the environmental movement have a lot of different thoughts on politics, on government, on how to come in there. But there is a lever of power there, just to put it there. There is um, an offer to oppose. And I think we could bolster that right now if we wanted to in storytelling. Danielle Smith is obviously taking up a whole lot of space applying the pressure. We have a counterweight in BC, David Eby. And yeah, I mean, I think one thing I really like is Rebecca Solnit's take on institutional politics, which is voting is a chess move, not a Valentine. Um, you can when, like, I think in this moment, supporting whoever is holding the line against the pipeline is a useful amount of time while we build our coalition. And then, yeah, I think totally following Coastal First Nations lead is what I'm really excited to do. And that amplification, that retelling of the story. Um, I know it sounds so simple to just repost something on Facebook or like something on Instagram, but that's how the algorithm works. And the algorithm has become such a part of our public story, what people are taking in, what they're consuming, what they even get to see. We now see kind of this research that people are not even taking in the same reality anymore based on what they see on social media. And we again can be the bridge to our communities, bringing these stories to our communities, um, showing what's happening, what we care about, again, signaling that there's going to be resistance in this
Mm-hmm.
moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, there is a media cycle, and right now the media cycle is hot on this issue. And in fact, I was in a meeting this morning about an independent review, supposedly independent, of Clean Energy BC, and the fact that we are missing our emission targets by huge marks, and all of that is obviously related to LNG. So I would really love to see a coalition that is not just reactive to when things happen to the environment, but could eventually become proactive and start to, point out that there is an alternative future available for our kids so that we're not just reacting when there's a threat, but we're also starting to present and paint a picture of an alternative reality that our governments could follow and that people can actually vote for.
And maybe just to give an example of what that looks like coalition
Mm-hmm.
building, because it can maybe
Yeah.
seem like, okay, well, what piece do I play in that? Obviously, supporting the orgs that you're already part of, building community, amplifying these stories. Um, but we all, again, have our own secret joys and ways of being in the world. And one of my things is like I love young adult magical fantasy novels. And so I actually turned my research on fossil fuel industry misinformation into one of these books. And I essentially go to any classroom that asks me. I'll go for free and I just talk. I talk about the stories that are being told. I talk about the misinformation. I show people kind of the stories that we need to pull out of our collective garden. Um, and I lean into what brings me joy to do that. And as I do that, I start creating more space in the public imagination. I see so many of those young people. I've now spoken to thousands and thousands and thousands. And then so many of them, once they've had that first contact, that first touch, that first entry into community, then come into community in big ways. Because they have someone challenge their apathy, welcome them into the movement. And that's again something we can all do all the time is just like lean into the way that you like to relate to people, bring your joy to it, and point out the falseness of stories and kind of where people might find other leadership.
Yes, thank you. There have been a couple of questions that kind of touch on the political realities of this proposed pipeline, including a question about what might be behind the federal government's abandonment of environmental concerns and how to approach that and counter that, and also a question about Danielle Smith's kind of motivations, and is this perhaps Carney's ways of placating Danielle Smith? And I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts on those slightly Machiavellian takes on the political situation around this pipeline.
Well, I think that the liberals are vulnerable as long as Trump is in power. And that really is feeding the conservative movement and Poilievre's constant criticism of the liberals. And we all know that the conservative base is in Alberta. So this is just a way for Carney to undercut the base of his opponent by showing that he's not anti-fossil fuels, because that really is the most important issue in Albertan politics. So
Mm,
if he undercuts the conservatives, he can reduce any threat to his government. And ultimately, that's what politicians care about. They care about, survival and being voted in. And that's why the more that we can show that people who are interested in the environment are voting, especially young people, and that they're going to vote on this issue, then the more that will have political influence. The main problem that, studies of uh, people in North America and even the UK find is that most voters think that the climate is really important, but they think economic prosperity is more important. And so our job is to show that those two things are actually related together, that you can't have a prosperous economy if your climate is going down the tubes. And in fact, that clean energy can provide economic opportunities. That's where I think we're misplaced on the message.
yes, I see that. Okay, thank you. Um, Another question that we had that I wanted to touch on before we move on is about the economy and the environment. And we've been hearing for 50 years that we act as though these two things are in opposition. We can't protect the environment and have a thriving economy. So the question is, how do we talk about the economy as being within the environment? This seems to be a big challenge. And I think that's something that all three of you probably have thoughts on for us, if you'd like to share.
Go for it, Doug.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first. So thanks. Yeah, I mean, I firmly believe they can coexist. I mean, that's been a mission of ours at our community level for the last 30 years. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, my community was about 95% unemployed. Um, and we've been on this big mission to move toward a conservation-based economy. Today, we're 100% employed. We're probably one of the most employed communities in all of Canada on a per capita basis. And we try to look at creative ways that are long term and sustainable, and that's something that we really wanted to focus on. And so, trying to have a diverse economy, we have things like ecotourism. Each of our communities now have stewardship departments. We get out there and take care of our land and our water. We have coastal guardian watering programs programs, science programs, land use planning departments, marine use planning departments, youth programs, language programs. And it's been quite remarkable to see the transformation just by putting some effort into trying to develop something that works for the community and something that, we don't want to be a boom and bust town, and we put a lot of effort into that. And it's been really good. Right now I'm on a retreat with my stewardship staff right now. And we're just talking about how to better create opportunities, and right now we probably have more jobs than we do people. And so yeah, I firmly believe in environment and jobs, and I think that you can do it, and that's been our goal. And I think there's lots of other examples in the Great Bear Rainforest and the Great Bear Sea around this. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
So I don't know if you want to go, Grace, but I have a lot to say about this, obviously, because I spend most of
I
my time.
Yeah, I wanted to hear. I wanted you to paint
Yeah.
the picture that your research. I'd love to hear it.
So, we're undergoing a transformation in terms of clean energy, that is similar to the internet revolution or the industrial revolution. When you think about fossil fuels, this is what they call carbon lock-in. It affects every single sector of the economy. Almost every economic activity is tied to fossil fuels. It's not just automobiles, right? It's all the food that gets transported from one place to the other. It's all the shipping that brings our trade in. It's all the natural gas that's heating our buildings. Um, we could go on and on, agriculture, fertilizer, plastics. And so we have this incredible dependence across our economy on fossil fuels. And so the question is, how do we get ourselves off of this addiction? And we've seen huge progress in terms of EVs and in terms of renewable energy, but it still requires massive amounts of investment. Remember, fossil fuels have been around for more than a century. And so all these gas stations that you see on every corner, instead of those, we need investments in charging stations. We need investments in batteries. We need investments in solar panels across the province so that you can start to generate all this electricity. And that's the real problem with what the government's doing now. It's beyond just the disaster that they're going to create in terms of environmental conditions. It's the loss of investments that's required for us to revolutionize our economy and make sure that we have a sustainable basis for it. And once you start making those investments, because renewable energy is competitive now, jobs will come with them. Right now, what the fossil fuels industry is doing is saying, we want government to come in and intervene because we can't compete without those subsidies. So it's a
Right.
really, really upside down kind of world that we're in right now.
It's a
Awesome.
very strong point. Thank you.
Yeah, I loved both those answers. It's really a joy to be on this panel. Doug, that's amazing. Huge congratulations to
Yeah.
you and your community. And yeah, I'm really curious. I'm going to look up more output from your lab. That's really interesting. I think this is again when it comes down to story. Like so many places have told us that the technical and financial barriers are possible to pass, but we need the political will to do it. We need the political will. I'm American originally, Canadian now, and I have watched again and again us fail to build political will or just miss out on it. I was actually interning in the White House when the Obama administration almost passed comprehensive climate legislation, and we couldn't because of lobbying and the way that that built in again years of our economy and shaped things for so long to come. Story and political will have such importance. Are they will dictate whether or not we are ready to make the investment in this clean energy economy that is hopefully Indigenous led. And this is why I work with young people, and I would encourage you to do the same, is that lots of polling and also anecdotally, we know young people see this as an urgent threat. They see climate as an urgent threat. They see it already as an intersectional justice issue. Young people were some of the only voters who put climate at the very top of the list. Not all of them, but they're the strongest voting bloc that sees that way. And but they don't we're kind of losing them from institutional politics and democracy because they're so fed up with what they've seen. They feel betrayed. And they really feel like the adults of the world have failed them. So one reason that I work so closely with young people, besides the fact that I think it's an absolute moral prerogative, you know, if we can't guarantee them a future, we owe them a present. And in giving them a present, will help guarantee them a future. Um, and also, they're these incredible ambassadors to older folks in their lives. Again, this is about ambassadors. And every single one of you on this call, you showed up now, you brought your time here. You obviously have the passion. Like, where can you bring that in your community of people? I'll talk about climate at the dentist. And a lot of it is how we talk, right? Like, how do we tell these stories? Like, you don't want to make someone defensive. Like, think about any time someone has like come at you or chastised you, that never opens you up to a conversation. But starting with that empathy of like, I understand where your fears are coming from. I understand that this world is a hard and heavy place right now. But you are being told a lie on what will bring us a good future and a good life, or kind of moving from this way of I really take your point, and there are other stories open, and also coming to work with young people who are already there. We don't even have to ship them. We just have to bring them back in, empower them, give them agency.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you. Well, we've taken a lot of questions from the audience and we've had some wonderful discussion. So, what I would love to do to close us out is ask each panelist to share with us, if you could, any advice or call to action that you would like to leave us with. And then after that, I'll give some specifics for folks who want to take action along with Sierra Club in support of this. So, if it's okay, I'd love to ask Doug to start and then Andy and Grace to also share.
Yeah, thank you. And just want to say thank you for having me on. And yeah, I just appreciate it. I appreciate everyone taking the time. This is to me one of the most important issues. We've gone through this before. We realize how much time and effort and work and money it's going to take. I mean, we're talking about big energy giants here, and it's going to take all of us. It's going to take every voice. It's going to take every person. So write to your MPs, write to your MLAs, lobby, support First Nations, because I think First Nations are going to be key to all of this. I think we're going to be standing on the front lines. I think we're going to be in the courtrooms, and so yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting battle. But hopefully all of us together, people power, will push this back like the first time. So thank you.
Thank you, Doug. We will stand with you. Andy?
I would just reiterate some of the points I made earlier. And, I think Grace's last discussion about being positive is really important. When people feel helpless, then they feel like whatever they do won't make a difference. And so that story that Doug told us about 100% employment, we need to get the media to cover those kinds of stories and start to paint that alternative reality so that we can push our politicians to stretch their imagination beyond fossil fuels and think about different kinds of policies they can follow. And the second thing I would reiterate is we need to work harder as an environmental movement to be on the same page. Maybe it's a joint press release, maybe
Yeah.
it's a more communication, maybe it's more forums like this. But one way or the other, I think the only way we can counteract the power of the fossil fuels lobby is if we can work more closely together.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I love that. Again, thanks, panelists. This has been really wonderful for me as well to learn from you folks. And given that we know that this is going to be a long fight and that this is really just a part of the fight, right? Like there will be other projects. This will be a fight. This is the grand fight of our lifetime. And really reflecting on it and honoring it in that way that so many people have come before us to take up a huge piece of this. So many people will come after us. But really going back into our stories of why do we do this? We're coming up on the holidays. you'll have some time, hopefully, with your friends and family. Like, lean into what you fight for. What do you love about this place, about your family, about the kids in your lives? Like, really, please lean into that. That is what will fuel you to come back over and over and over again. And the really beautiful thing is that as we fight this pipeline, if we do it right, we fight for everything we want. We start telling stories that enable so much other change and that make more extractive um, pipelines harder. And so it can be that win-win if we can charge ourselves up, take care of ourselves, and come together. But really, what do you love? What are you fighting for? Lean into that right now. And we need you. We really need every single one of you. A lot of the work that I just do just as like a private citizen who leans into this with every tool I have, with all the love I've fueled up to fight for our present and our future. And I just do it. And so, yeah, do that, take that time, and come back refreshed for the battle ahead.
Thank you, Grace. Bring the love. Well, I do not have anything to add to those three very powerful statements of guidance from our panelists. We do have some specific actions that folks can take, and we're going to share those in an email. Whatever email you use to register for this webinar, you'll get a follow-up from us with a link to the recording to this webinar, and also some actions that include reaching out to your Liberal MP or Member of Parliament so that we can pressure them to hear our voices and to listen to the Coastal First Nations. We have an action center where you can email different Liberal MPs as well as the Prime Minister. And we will support folks who want to champion a council motion to defend the tanker ban, which has happened already in a couple of municipalities in BC. We'll help you do that if that's something you're interested in. And of course, you can donate to Sierra Club to support webinars like this and upcoming work to defend the tanker ban. And we also encourage you to follow Coastal First Nations. They have a website that includes their statement recently, a couple of different statements in response to what's going on with this pipeline discussion. So you can learn a lot there and find out ways to support the Coastal First Nations. And I will repeat a little bit of what Grace said. Take care of yourselves, feel the love, enjoy the nature that's around you, and think about how you are going to contribute to and bring your energy to protecting the people and places that we love. Thank you so much, Grace. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Doug. And thank you very much for all the participants in this webinar. We really appreciate you being here this evening. Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye-bye.